you know that AMD is coming back. Ryzen is gonna put them on top of Intel once and for all, which means I need to get on this hype train and build an all AMD system featuring an FX series processor, which is incredibly long in the tooth at this point. I know, the timing does seem strange, but with all of the hardware that's come through my channel, I have never done a completely AMD system. And so this is gonna be like basically a post-mortem look to see what the end-of-life performance of the FX series processor with an RX 480, how that stacks up against the Intel and Nvidia equivalent, which I'm going to choose as the i3-6100 for price reasons, and then the GTX 1066 gig. So there's gonna be two builds in this video comparing the AMD system against the Intel and Nvidia system. And we're gonna see how those two stack up, which, I mean, will also serve as a good checking point for when Ryzen actually does come out. So, big thanks to Wootware for sponsoring basically all of the hardware necessary for me to make this video. I got the G.Skill RAM, I got the power color graphics card, I got the Anderson power supply, I got the Fantex cooler, I got the Fantex case. Wootware, you guys are great, so thank you for sponsoring this. I'm going into accents, I really need to just get to the build at this point. So come along, we're gonna build this system, it's gonna be great, and we'll see how it stacks up against Intel and Nvidia. The AMD system is completely built, got the graphics card, got the CPU, everything's installed. I haven't even tried to turn it on yet. Cable management is really bad because I'm just doing a performance test. And so for airflow, I have the Corsair HD 120 RGB fans at the front, two of those. And then for the exhaust, I have the Fantex 140 millimeter included fan that came with the N2 Evolve. So that's what I'm going to be using to cool the system, because I'm going to be measuring power draw as well as thermals of both the GPU and CPU, as well as its performance in games at 1080p, because the RX 480 and GTX 1060 tend to struggle at 1440p. Not that they can't do it, but I think the 1080p performance is about where you want, and it's also going to be more CPU bound with the higher frame rates at 1080p. So that's where we're going to go. But now is the moment of truth. I need to switch on the power supply, the Anderson 800 watt 80 plus gold, and then now it is time to press the power button. No power. Did I already switch it on? Did I switch it off at that point? The thing I would suspect is that I set up the power switch incorrectly. Oh, okay, that's what it was. Oh, that hurt. That broke it. Okay. Take two! Let me just make sure I get the right colors. Red. Red for AMD. Now it is alive. When I was trying to move the USB 3 cable, since it's poorly positioned towards the back of the actual chassis, I accidentally stuck my finger into this Fantex blade, and now, as you can see, it is one blade short, which means that it is no longer fit to go in the case because it is off balance. It is literally shaking my hand even at that low RPM. Braided Ethernet cable. Thank you, Beyond Customs. Let's just make sure that everything's running appropriately. We have the FX 8350 8-core processor running at a full 4.4 gigahertz, 3.92 according to this. We're running a 49-degree CPU temp with a 30-degree motherboard temp. Just on idle. Why is that going so hard? Why is... Oh, Nvidia... Look at this! The freaking Nvidia stuff is taking up all of the CPU on a full AMD system. What are you doing? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get drivers and then I'm going to run all the benchmarks, and I will check back with you guys once I have the results for both this system and then also the Intel Nvidia system. So hold tight, and I mean, editing's going to make this instantaneous, but like right now, there we go. Hello. No, this is still old me, but I'm going to edit in new me at this part so that... Okay, benchmarking is freshly done on the AMD system. There are a few things that I need to note before I move on to the Intel system and show you guys the comparison benchmarks. Number one, I am not sure exactly what it is. I'm going to suspect that it's the ASRock motherboard, but I could not overclock this chip whatsoever because it would thermal throttle at 61 degrees Celsius no matter what I did, no matter what I turned off in the BIOS. The chip itself would not push past 60 degrees. It would drop to 1.4 gigahertz, until which it dropped to 59 degrees, and then it would go back up to the overclock. So no matter what I tried to do, I couldn't get it to work, so I left it at stock. Considering that I'm not going to be overclocking the i3-6100, I think that's a fair comparison. And then also with the RX 480, that was left at stock as well. Let me go ahead and give you some of the general specs of what I saw happening. So for the RX 480, that came out to 74 degrees Celsius during all of the benchmarking as a max, and around like 70 to 72 during most of the testing. The 8350, again, as I mentioned, would thermal throttle at anything above 60 degrees Celsius, so it was around the 57, 58 during most of the testing. The max power draw, this is freaking interesting. The max power draw for this entire system, 460 watts. A single 8350 and a single RX 480 drew more power than I've seen come out of a system with a 7700K overclocked to 5 gigahertz and a GTX 1080. Wow, AMD. Wow. Ryzen better be power efficient because the 8350 is just, it's rough. The average usage though, the max was 460, the average though was around 400 watts, and then the GPU by itself pulled a max of 166 watts with a 125 watt average. That is a lot of power being drawn from the system and being put into this, and that's on an 80 plus gold power supply. Holy smokes. I need to go put more electricity in my prepaid meter now because I'm basically out. Okay, I'm going to disassemble this and we'll get on to the Intel and Nvidia system. The Intel system is assembled. Obviously, the only things that I really would have changed are the motherboard, the CPU, and then also the RAM because it's DDR4 instead of DDR3. But I did stick with the same manufacturer, G.Skill, and also their Trident series, but now it's the Z RGB instead of the X. So let's go ahead and turn this thing on, and red is completely the wrong color. We need a good old-fashioned Nvidia green. There we go. Everything seems to be working just fine. Waiting to get it up on the screen. Big thanks to Byron for allowing me to use the Intel i3-6100, but the motherboard I'm using is the Gigabyte Z170X Designaire. Yes, I believe that's correct. I'm also going to have the RAM running at the same frequency of 2400 megahertz. I use the same Grizzly thermal paste. It's the same Fantex CPU cooler, the same Anderson 800 watt power supply, same Corsair HD 120 fans in the same configuration, just a different coloring effect. So I'm not going to overclock the i3-6100. I'm going to run the G.Skill Trident Z at 2400 megahertz because that's what the Trident X was running at. So that's a GTX 1060 6GB from Galax. I don't remember what its rated base and boost clocks are, but I'm not going to even touch anything. I'm not going to touch the power limit. I'm not going to touch the voltage. Just going to keep it completely stock, let GPU boost do its thing, and we'll see what rounds out with the entire system. All of the benchmarking is now done on the Galax GTX 1060 with the i3-6100, and just a few quick specs of the system overall before we get into the benchmark numbers. For the Galax GPU, it did actually run hotter than the PowerColor RX 480, coming to a max 78 degrees Celsius with an average run of like 76 degrees during gaming. For the CPU, that ran at 43 degrees Celsius, so quite a bit cooler than the 8350. And then as far as power draw, this is where the Intel and Nvidia system shines. The max power draw during the entire testing was 191 watts with an average of 175. So under half of what the AMD system was pulling. That is just crazy. So we're going to get into the benchmark numbers now and see how that power draw actually translates into actual performance. So for the first benchmark, we're going to take a look at 3D Mark's Firestrike, and we can see that the Intel system does indeed perform better than the AMD system by about 400 points or so on the overall test, winning in graphics but losing in physics and then reclaiming ground in the combined test. 3D Mark's Time Spy, on the other hand, gives a 300-point advantage to the AMD system, with it coming in higher overall, slightly better in graphics, and quite a bit better in the CPU department, which makes sense since this is a DX12 benchmark, and obviously AMD has been performing better on that API. So moving on to real games like Ashes of the Singularity, all of the tests were run at 1080p at basically the highest settings possible without anti-aliasing. So on the crazy preset in DX11, the Intel and Nvidia system slaughtered the AMD system by giving it a 15 FPS advantage. Just insane. DX12 does help the AMD system to gain a little ground by putting it up to 35.5 FPS, but the Intel and Nvidia system is still at over 40. Gears of War 4, which is an exclusive DirectX 12 game, actually gives the AMD system quite a bit of an advantage. The average FPS is 11 frames higher than the Intel and Nvidia system, although the average CPU frame rate is slightly lower than on the Intel and Nvidia system, which means that the RX 480 was pulling all of the weight there. Hitman is another game in which the Intel and Nvidia system has the upper hand with 6 FPS higher average than the AMD system. Rise of the Tomb Raider, another game which gives the advantage to the Intel and Nvidia system, with it coming in at 18 FPS higher in DX11 and then another 14 FPS higher in DX12. Total War Warhammer is another game in which the Intel and Nvidia system is just handing the AMD system's butt to itself. Rough numbers in either DirectX setup. Now this next result surprised me. The Witcher 3, which is a notoriously better performing game on Nvidia graphics cards. So let's go ahead and take a look at this chart. What? The AMD system does better by like 0.2 FPS? Yes, my friends, with Hairworks on, which is an Nvidia exclusive feature, the AMD system beats out the Intel and Nvidia system by very small margins. When you turn Hairworks off, it kind of swings back the other way, but the AMD system is still within under half an FPS of its Intel and Nvidia equivalent. So there we go. Conclusion, the AMD system is just as good. It competes in Witcher 3. That's all that matters. That's the game that matters, Witcher 3. Cutting to the chase though, while the i3-6100 costs about $20 less than the FX 8350, it is 1, much more power efficient, 2, seems to perform better in all games, and 3, draws incredibly less power. The FX 8350, it's kind of obsolete at this point. The only scenarios where the AMD system did better was 1 in Time Spy, which is DirectX 12, then Gears of War 4, which is also DirectX 12, and then in Witcher 3 of all games. I have no explanation for that, but it seems like the RX 480 was pulling its weight in all of those scenarios rather than its CPU itself. However, I will have to say kudos to the RX 480 for actually keeping up with the GTX 1060, there it is, in most of these games. It's actually quite impressive that it was able to make up for the FX 8350's lack in all of my testing. However, all kudos being taken away for the fact that this system, these things together, draws nearly 500 watts from the wall. That is insane. I've tested 7700Ks with GTX 1080s that have drawn under that amount. You can get the top of the line graphics, consumer graphics card on the market right now, put it in a system, and you won't draw as much power as these two. So I think there are a couple conclusions that I probably want to make with this video. First off, I see why I never built an AMD system. The RX 480, I'll totally take any day of the week. It can compete with the GTX 1066 gig in whatever game you choose the battleground and then argue over which one's better. Fair enough. But getting an FX series processor at this point, it's such a bad idea. One, the price to performance is worse than the i3-6100. I mean, that only has 2 cores and 4 threads versus an 8-core CPU, and the 8-core CPU is still underperformed. Then number 2, not only is it a more expensive CPU to buy outright, it's also a more expensive CPU to run long term. You're drawing so much freaking power from the wall. It's insane! Insane! This is not to say that the AMD system doesn't have merit. This is not to say that the FX series don't have merit and that if you have one, you need to throw it out. That's not what I'm saying at all. There are scenarios where the FX series processor with the RX 480 are still a good choice. And if those are the scenarios that you're into, then by all means, disregard everything I'm saying in this video because you know your needs better than I do. I'm sold. I'm sold on Ryzen. That's what this video is. The FX 8350 is long in the tooth. It's not worth getting at this point. Please don't buy it new. But that's the point of this video. Ryzen is gonna be amazing. And you know it, I know it, and I'm waiting for it. So guys, smash that like button if you like the video, if you like the test that I did. Dislike it if you suck, which you don't. So don't hit that dislike button because you're amazing, and I'm glad that you're part of my channel, and I'm glad that you have chosen to subscribe to me, and maybe you haven't, but you should click that subscribe button down below and then click that bell that's next to the subscribe button so that you can actually be notified of my subscription news. Let me know if you have any suggestions for future videos on what you want me to do, what you want me to check out, what tech is interesting to you. I'll be sure to do my best to get my hands on it. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Look at the RGB lights. Here. While we're waiting, let me, oh yeah, look at that pulsing. Look at that pulsing, that's beautiful. What about, oh, flashing. That's a nice flash, look at the flash. Okay, what is this? Ooh, like a spiral. You can't see it, but it starts on the first fan, and then it goes to the second one, and then it goes to the third. So it's like looping on each one. It's amazing. Okay, next one. Oh, that's like a slot machine type thing. Oh, it's doing the full RGB. That's pretty cool. But I just want green. I don't want red in there. That's the same thing. And just static green. There we go.